This is Sensei's secret wild technique. I'd like to point out that every technique that I do or recommend is just a game that I play that I think will increase the chances of lucid dreaming. This is not scientific. This is not philosophical or psychological. It's just a game that if I play by these rules, I will increase my chances. Step one is to understand what a wild is. Wild is a wake-initiated lucid dream. This means that you go straight from waking life to sleeping without ever losing consciousness. If you do wild correctly, it will seem like you are teleporting from your waking life into a dream. Step two is to understand how falling asleep works like a game and not physically. I don't care about the science, I care about the game of falling asleep consciously. So, there are three things that I would recommend to understand about this game. The first is that there are different phases of falling asleep, and these phases seem to be able to make you lose consciousness as you fall asleep. I call this the phase barrier. The second thing that you need to know about the game is that these phases are not always the same, nor are they in the same order or for the same amount of time, and they are usually different from person to person as well. The third thing that you need to know is that the longest and the place with the most phases that you will go through is going to generally be at the beginning of the night. So this is why we recommend waking during the night in order to wild. This will mean that the phase barrier is smaller and easier to cross. Sometimes it won't even be there at all. The third thing is to figure out some things about the phases that you go through. You need to actually gather some intel and figure out what falling asleep is like for you. Most people ignore this part of their day. So what I want you to do is actually lay down and try to catch the second that you lose consciousness. What was happening in your brain that made you lose consciousness? Why didn't you wild? I recommend laying in an uncomfortable position that you can't fall asleep in. Your body will go through similar phases that you would normally go through while you fall asleep, but it'll struggle to fall asleep. This way you can actually see the phases as you go through them. They may be a little different since you aren't actually going to sleep, but it should give you an idea of the types of things you're going to experience. The next thing is to listen to an audiobook. Try to follow along with it as you fall asleep. And then when you wake up, rewind and go back to the last moment you remember and play it from there. See if any of these things spark memories of the phases and how your brain was operating at that time. Examples of different phases include hypnagogic imagery, floating limb sensations, auditory hallucinations, mind seemingly running on its own in weird directions, buzzing, itching, feeling heavy, feeling light, and spinning sensations. Now, this is not a comprehensive list of everything that you could feel, and you may feel any of them, or you may feel all of them, or different ones that I didn't mention. Now we move on to step 4, which is to take what you've learned about your phases and make a plan. The plan is generally considered an anchor. Now, an anchor is a mental or physical thing that you keep your mind on as you fall asleep so that you don't lose consciousness through the phases. So let's talk about how to make a plan and how to fix it when it ultimately fails. Since wild is all about trial and error on the path to dreams, you are going to be constantly on your toes with wild and constantly failing. It took me a long time to get consistent with wild, about a year to get one a week. Now, maybe I just sucked at it, but I think that it's just difficult for people to understand how many tries you need to do with wild to understand how you fall asleep. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that we always have 3 possibilities for what will happen during a wild attempt. One is that we fall asleep unconscious, just like you normally do at the beginning of the night. The second is that we stay awake, conscious. People with insomnia will understand this. They'll lay in bed, they'll try to sleep, and they can't fall asleep. And the third thing is, of course, that we fall asleep conscious. This is a wild. This is the goal, and obviously it's what we want, but what I want you to do is, with what you know of your mind, which one are you most likely to experience? Is it going to be staying awake and unconscious or falling asleep and unconscious? Now, for different people, it may be different at different times of the night, but I recommend noting, is this going to be easy for me to fall asleep, or is it going to be hard for me to fall asleep? For me, falling asleep at the beginning of the night is often difficult unless I'm sleep deprived. But going back to sleep is usually very easy. For this game of Wild, we're going to look at anchors, and classify them as either heavy or light. Now, some will be in the middle, and there is time for that in the future, but for now, we're looking at heavy and light anchors. If I cannot fall asleep very easily while I'm sitting up, then that would be a heavy anchor. If I cannot stay awake very easily while I am counting, that would be a light anchor. So in general, what we're looking for is something in the Goldilocks zone, something that you can fall asleep with sometimes, and sometimes you can't fall asleep with. Whenever you find this, you want to stick with it, because this is going to lead you to a wild. Practical advice here is that if you're going to be attempting multiple wilds at night, or attempting it early in the night, you want to lean towards a light anchor so that you don't lose out on hours and hours of sleep. Like always, you don't want to do stupid things in order to lucid dream, like losing 5 hours of sleep for one attempt at a wild. Now, if you've already slept 7 hours and you're wanting to do a wild attempt, you don't care if it takes 3 hours and you miss out on 1 hour of sleep, then by all means, try as hard as you want. Step number 6 is to look back and figure out what went wrong. So this is going to be really the place where you want to journal. You want to write down what you did and why it didn't work, or why you think it didn't work. Then try it again while altering that thing. This means you're going to be using the same anchor over and over, but you're going to be changing how you hold the anchor every single time. Now, as you do this, you may figure out that this anchor doesn't work for me. So let's talk about the anchor that I'm going to recommend to you guys, which is sitting up. I think almost everyone is going to struggle to fall asleep sitting up at a 90-degree angle. So what I want you to do is wake up during the night, and after some amount of time that you think would be good for a wild, go sit at 90 degrees and try to sleep. If you can't sleep, change it to 85 degrees. If you still can't sleep, change it to 80 degrees. Keep track of the things that are happening in your mind. Now, this is going to be something where eventually you will find a degree that you can actually fall asleep on. When you find that degree, write it down. Then you can try that degree the next 5, 10, 20 nights and see if there's something else small that you can change that will make it easier or harder for you as you get closer and closer to falling asleep consciously. Hey, if you like my videos, please consider joining my Patreon. Right now, I have this wild technique plus 12 different tips for wild that I'll be releasing in a video soon, as well as a handbook for beginners for lucid dreaming that you'll get at any tier for subscribing to my Patreon. I'll be coming up with a bunch of new things on there soon, as well as all of my video ideas are going to be on there before I make them into video.